Presidential Forum on Millennium Development Goals. That's the inset over here. Ex-President, former President Joseph Estrada has arrived. Also, Senator Francis Escudero. They have arrived at the AIM. The forum may start any minute now. We're just waiting for them to begin.
She's wearing a leather jacket.
I think so.
Looks like it. We can see the extremes of personalities and fashion style.
Former president wearing a barong.
Yeah.
We have Senator Cheese Escudero wearing a leather jacket.
Is it a leather jacket?
Looks like it.
Oh. We'll ask him later on. We'll see a little bit closer. But both of them expected to announce their candidacy soon.
Well, in the past, yeah.
Formerly, well, in the past week.
Well, they haven't
formally
made the big announcement.
Yeah.
They've
alluded
in one way to another.
But they've postponed for the official announcement. Lindo Media now joins us on the line from the Asian Institute of Management in Makati, where she'll be covering the FOCAP and the forum on MDG. Linda, go ahead.
Hello, Ron.
Linda, go ahead.
Hello?
Yes, Linda, we can hear you.
Yeah, right. The forum is about to start now. They've already called in the presidential aspirants. There are 5 here right now, led by former President Joseph Estrada, Senator Cheese Escudero, Senator Richard Gordon, Mr. Nicanor Perlas, and Olongapo City Councilor J.C. De Los Reyes. As we mentioned earlier, De Los Reyes and, right now Perlas are the little-known presidential aspirants, but they too have already declared their intention to vie for the highest post in the land. Any moment now, we are expecting them to make presentations on the on what they plan to do to achieve some of the MDGs or the Millennium Development Goals as outlined by the United Nations. And after that, there's going to be a question and answer forum also to enable the panel to get more of their position on certain issues such as education, poverty, maternal health, possibly So we'll turn you over right now. If the studio is ready, they're in the process of introducing the presidential aspirants who are in today's MDG Leaders Forum. DJ and Ron?
Thank you very much for that, Linda. We'll turn you over to the forum. Let's listen in.
Agriculture, microfinance, and credit, particularly in South Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, and Western Europe. Our keynote speaker joined the United Nations Millennium Campaign in October 2003 as director, after 2 decades as a recognized civil society leader. Since then, he has played a pivotal role in building up the global advocacy campaign for the achievement of the Millennium Development Goals in over 50 countries. Prior to joining the United Nations, our keynote speaker was the chief executive of ActionAid, a leading international development NGO. Here, he worked initially in field programs in South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa, and laterly in the fundraising and advocacy programs in Europe and the United States. An Indian national, he has earned a distinction in a master's degree of science in social policy and planning from the London School of Economics, and has a master's degree in business administration from the Indian Institute of Management in Ahmedabad. Ladies and gentlemen, we are privileged to have with us, visiting the Philippines, the UN Millennium Campaign Director, Mr. Salil Shetty.
Thank you, Ruth, for that embarrassingly long introduction. I have no illusions, ladies and gentlemen, that nobody in this room has come to listen to me today. I know that you have come to listen to the gentleman here, so I'm going to keep it pretty short. Let me start by thanking the FOCAP, the Foreign Correspondents Association, for hosting this event. It's very timely and very important, and also thanks to my colleagues from the United Nations in the Philippines. I want to also start by expressing our strong solidarity for the victims of the typhoons and the tropical storms that have hit the country. I know it's been a very difficult time, and I want to express our strongest solidarity to them, and I know that the coming weeks will continue to test all of us here, so I wish you all the best in dealing with these challenges. really talking about the crisis that the world is facing today. I guess we have many crises which are often listed in these times. The biggest one that's been talked about in recent times is the economic crisis or crisis of economics. Anybody who's studying economics these days knows that almost all the textbooks have to be rewritten because we have to re-understand and reconfigure our understanding of economics really at the global level, but equally at the national level. We have the other massive crisis, the crisis of security, which is facing the world in so many different corners, including in the Philippines. And then, of course, we have the climate crisis, and Philippines is just going through that. And ultimately, today's discussion is on the crisis of poverty. As you know, we have 500 million people who are living in extreme poverty in the most difficult conditions, and over 1 billion people hungry as we speak today. We have 500 million women dying every year during childbirth. All of these are highly unacceptable numbers which we are facing. And I wanted to just dwell a minute or two on the status of the Millennium Development Goals today at the global level before we come to the Philippines. I'm very pleased that President Estrada is here because he was the one who actually signed the Millennium Declaration on behalf of the Philippines. So it's good that we have a direct signatory to the declaration in our midst here today. Essentially at the global level, since the year 2000 when the goals were signed, I think we can take some comfort in the fact that many good things have happened thanks to the signing of these goals, and these goals represent a Millennium Compact between developed and developing countries. And the world leaders who met in September 2000 at the United Nations committed themselves to freeing their fellow citizens from abject poverty and for upholding the dignity of every citizen, every human being on the planet. And since then we've had at least 800 million people coming out of poverty. We've had 40 million children, more children going to school, and we've saved lives of at least 2 million children across the world. So we can say that a lot has happened, but as I said earlier, there are massive challenges in front of us which have been exacerbated by the financial crisis and by the climate crisis that we are facing. So those are the challenges we have in front of us. But the interesting thing is that if we look at the progress that we've seen over the last few years, the most sort of striking thing is that some of the poorest countries in the world have actually shown enormous progress, including in sub-Saharan Africa, but equally in this part of the world. Some of the very poor countries, and I've just come from Bangladesh myself. I came from Dhaka yesterday. Bangladesh, interestingly, in South Asia is one of the poorest countries, but it's actually done much better than India, which is the country I come from. So if you start analyzing as to what are the underlying factors which actually determine progress in particular countries, I think that there's one sort of factor which we keep going back to, and that is good governance, good leadership, and good democratic accountability. And it's fascinating how very strong, clear leadership takes us towards a path of development, prosperity, equality, and equity. It's amazing that this is consistently true, whether it's Latin America, it's Africa, or it's Asia. We keep coming back to the question of governance. And from that point of view, today's discussion is very appropriate to see how potential future leaders of the country would relate to the whole question of the Millennium Development Goals in the Philippines context. And what we did really in relation to this whole process was to have a small survey, and it's called I Vote for MDG's campaign. And I hope that my colleagues here can show you some of the figures from that. I think if you have it, Dulce, if you could just show us. We just did a small survey with, well, it's not so small actually. We had 14,000 respondents, and you can see the sort of demographic profile of the respondents. And we simply asked them a question which, if you can show Dulce what the question was that we asked people. Essentially, we asked them to prioritize what their top 3 priorities or the highest priorities they have within the various sort of development agendas that we have. And the answer, using the tick marks, what they told, I must say that the people were from different parts of the country. You can see that the demographics and the geographical distribution of the people who responded was quite diverse, and it was done in a kind of a snap poll. It's not a very detailed one, but I think we've got a pretty representative sample there, and the outcomes are pretty clear, and you can show the outcomes. The top 3 issues related to the Millennium Development Goals. The first one is essentially on poverty, livelihood, employment. The second one is on environment. And I think there's also the one on housing, Dulce, if you've got that right. The third one is on housing. So these are the 3 top issues which came out from the survey, from the polling which we did. And I'm sure we'd very much like to hear comments from the panel on how they would respond to each of these things. Now, I want to just close by saying one thing in relation to the Philippines. The picture in the Philippines actually is not very different from the picture globally, in the sense that the country has made enormous progress on some parameters, and I think we can be proud of that, and we should celebrate successes where it is. But I think the challenges, the big challenges we are facing really are in the area of poverty itself. We continue to have a situation where about 1/3 of the population of this country is living in poverty, which is simply unacceptable to Filipinos and indeed to anybody who's looking at this issue. We continue to have 93 babies dying every day. Infant mortality, children dying is still very high. We have 11 mothers every day dying, which is the maternal mortality continues to be very high. And we have to remember that we have at least 5 million children who are still not in school in the Philippines today. And when we look at the performance of the Philippines, we have to remember that these Millennium Development Goals were actually setting the bar pretty low. In fact, they were set for the poorest countries in the world, and Philippines is a middle-income country, and really for the Philippines not to achieve any of these goals is simply not something which I'm sure anybody can find acceptable. We also have a situation in the Philippines where the national average is a little bit deceptive, because there are many regions and many social groups who are masked given the average performance. But I think we are really hoping that the incoming president will be somebody who is going to make sure that the Millennium Development Goals are achieved by 2015, not for some citizens, but for every single Filipino. And I'm here this weekend really for something called Stand Up and Take Action, which we have been running for the last few years. And as one would expect, Filipino people have stood up in large numbers. And last year we had 35 million Filipinos who stood up for the Millennium Development Goals, who express their voice against poverty. This year we're expecting the number to be even higher. The counting is going on as we speak. And the important thing that the candidates need to know really is that each of these 35 million plus Filipinos are obviously voters, and I think these are their concerns, these are the issues. We've actually brought out a document on this called Millennium Development Goals and Elections, making votes and voices count during elections. I would say it's a good primer for potential candidates. It's on our website. We're happy to give you copies. But as I said, you've all come to listen to the candidates and not me, so thank you very much, and I wish the discussion every success. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Salil. Making this Millennium Development Goals Leaders Forum a reality, we would first like to thank our partners, the Foreign Correspondents Association of the Philippines, the United Nations Development Program, the UN Millennium Campaign, PoliticalArena.com, and Youth Vote Philippines. So, without further ado, I think you're all excited to hear from our presidential candidates. I'd like to call on Mr. Gabby Tabuñar, former CBS News Bureau Chief, for the start of this part of the program.
Thank you. Thank you, Ruth. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and good morning, gentlemen. First, just to clarify some ground rules, we will ask opening statements from you to last only 2 minutes. We have to strictly follow that rule, so as a due respect to the other members of the of this guest lineup. There will be somebody who will tell you the time as it passes as you talk. There will be a 1-minute card, 30-second card, and that's it. And there will be 3 subjects that we will deal on. We will ask you to comment on and give us your views. The issue is poverty, the number one. The number two issue is maternal health. Number three issue is education. Many of you, all of you have spoken on these one way or the other during your public speeches. And there will be a panel of questionnaires from FOCUP who will comprise each of these issues. May I ask the panel members of poverty, Charmaine Diogracias of NHK, Coco Alquas of Bloomberg, and Raja Gopalakrishnan, the Reuters bureau chief, to come at the panel desk, please. And also, we'd like to tell you that your answers, gentlemen, will also comprise only for 2 minutes. You will also be timed. And we will entertain questions from FOCUP members who are not members of the panel. FOCUP members who are here now, we will ask you FOCUP members to write down your questions and give them to the panel members who will read your questions. Only members of FOCUP can ask questions. And well, that's it. So time is running out. I'd like to call on the first candidate to deliver his opening statement, well-known civic leader, Mr. Nick Perlas. Yes, please.
Okay, that's the problem. Okay, first of all, good morning to everyone, and I'm glad that this forum is being held to see the perspective of the different presidential candidates on various developmental issues. Poverty is a complex issue. It is not merely an economic issue. Poverty also has a lot to do with peace and order situation of the country. If you notice the correlation between peace and order, for example, in ARM, which is a 60% rate of poverty, and some of the other areas of the country. So there's the peace issue connected with it. You've got microeconomic issues of employment, especially in the rural areas. So agricultural modernization is going to be a very important part, because 70% of the poverty is in rural areas, and more than 60% are based in agriculture, fisheries, and other similar industries. And on top of that, we have to have the proper macroeconomic framework for investments to flow in, for other kinds of services to flow in, and then also we have to have the proper business climate. So these are some of the highlights for the Philippines according to a study that was done on many aspects. In addition to this, we have to become more increasingly prepared for disaster response. The super typhoons that just hit the Philippines, Ondoy and Pepeng, are not accidents. This is a large part, a large part connected with global change, climate change, which is intensifying. And I just wish to say that at the global level, the Copenhagen conference this December, that climate change, more drastic measures, not at 2050, but at 2020, most of the agreements will be made, because we are going to see extreme weather events as well as increasing sea levels, which all impact on poverty. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Perlas. I would like also to announce that for each subject matter, there will be a specialist from different agencies of the government and institutions to sit with the panel. And for the first issue, which is poverty, I'd like to call on Dr. Arsenio Balisacan of the UP School of Economics to please join the panel. Doctor? I didn't know there was a microphone there, so if you gentlemen would like to use the microphone at the table, please. Just wag na kayo tumindig. Thank you, Doctor. All right, so the number two is speaker will his opening statement is Senator Escudero.
Sa ating po lahat, isang maganda at pinagpalang umaga, pleasant morning to you all. MDG on poverty eradication. Some statistics and data. 40% of Filipinos derive their livelihood from agriculture. 20% thereof indirectly from agriculture. 52% of the average family income is being spent on food. So if we indeed want to eradicate poverty and or hunger, we must address these twin issues concomitantly. Government must spend on agriculture. Laws have been passed mandating spending on agriculture not at a minimum level of not even 3% of our national budget, and yet these have yet to be implemented by the current administration. We must spend on agriculture if we want to change the lives of our people dependent on the agricultural sector for their livelihood. We must also spend on agriculture so that we can lower the cost of food, so that people can live better lives and eat better and perhaps avoid hunger, which has been experienced by a relatively significant percentage of our population. Second thing that government should do would be to make jobs here in the Philippines and not only abroad. Government must be able to attract investors, both foreign and local, in order to provide meaningful and lasting and long-lasting jobs for our countrymen here, so that they can have meaningful income as well in order to spend for their basic needs, including that of their families. Third, government must reintroduce itself to the environment. As we have seen in the newspapers in the past, if we continue on neglecting what is going on around us, whatever headway we make, we will always be going back to square one. Whatever amounts of money we spend to develop and improve on the items I mentioned, we will still be going back to square one if we do not realize that we live in an environment that's fast changing, and we must accept that and realize that in the hope that these changes will not be as drastic so as to affect whatever developments and headway we may have made. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator. And now we call on former President Joseph Estrada.
Well, first of all, I want to thank the organizer for inviting me in this forum. And I'm honored to be in this forum because I'll be here in participating for the cause of the United Nations Millennium Development Goals. And although I've been very busy shooting and making a movie, I made the point to come here because it's important for me, because I was the president then who signed the Millennium Declaration of the United Nations in New York in 2000, which now for the Philippines, and which now I have the distinction of being the Philippine Millennium President. Well, as I would say that eradication of poverty is very close to my heart, because in 1998, when I was campaigning, my slogan was "Erap para sa mahirap." In other words, Estrada for the poor, and that made me win by the biggest margin ever in the history of all presidential election. And this did not remain a mere slogan, but translated into a real policies and programs which my administration implemented. During my administration, we gave the biggest budget for social services and the biggest real per capita budget for education. In fact, I'm the only president who imposed no sovereign guarantee on all contracts.
Mr. President, we'll have to stop there. I'm sorry, but your time is up.
Okay.
We will have lots of time to talk about your favorite issue. Thank you. Now we call on another civic leader. For those of you who don't know him yet, he's representing Kapatiran.
Good morning.
JC Dos Reyes.
Good morning. The starting point for any meaningful change for the better is to accept that we have failed as a nation. since ang Kapatiran Party believes in the principle of first things first. And so we declare that ultimately the problem is moral. As in my position as a councilor, 2 terms, the first thing I will have to do if elected is to lead the country in realizing and accepting this, to clearly define the problem for a viable solution. We are guilty of what Mohandas Gandhi called the 7 social sins. Let me emphasize the first, politics without principle. The Philippines is bound to fail in achieving the Millennium Development Goal. Number 1, on poverty and hunger, if traditional politics persist, rearing the ugly head of patronage, illegal transactions, and compromises. Politics of personality, dynasty, dole-out, and utang na loob, and graft and corruption. The Catholic Bishops' Conference said that the reason why we are what we are today is because of debased and prostituted politics. Moral renewal starts when we alter assumptions, such as a correct understanding of what politics is, more responsible and accountable political parties, and a correct understanding of the common good. One of the 10 founding principles of ang Kapatiran Party is very relevant in addressing hunger and poverty, the preferential option for the poor and the vulnerable. So, as a platform, to make headway, we propose to work towards abolishing the pork barrel system, make representations before the Supreme Court to bring about the speedy administration of justice, ensure transparency and public accountability in all government activities and transactions. At this juncture in our nation's life, all, especially those who have, must sacrifice. Ang Kapatiran Party will try to lead in not only doing the right things, but doing things right. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, J. Singh. And now for the opening statement of Senator Richard Gordon. Oh.
I always want to stay behind Gabby. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for inviting me here. I'm merely a presumptive candidate right now. I have not made any announcements like my friends here. But let me just point out that number 1, I think poverty, and I have defined it when I was in Pinatubo, is an absence of choice. And without good governance, without focused, fast, friendly, flexible, forward-looking governance, you're not going to be able to make anything happen in this country. The number 1 thing that we need to know is that before we do anything in this country, we have to change our attitude. I've always said what this country needs is not just a change of men, but a change in men. None of us here can change our country unless we're able to motivate our people to believe in a vision where they themselves can enable and ennoble themselves. I can give you all the statistics about our country. Education is woefully down. I cannot live in a country that allows itself to put, mere verbal commitment to education as number 1 in the Constitution, when in fact debt is number 1. And number 2 is era of the government, local government. And only 3 in education. Cannot live in a country where we have agriculture being seconded perpetually. We cannot even repair our our irrigation systems, and certainly we're not able to move and conquer the vicissitudes of nature as we can see. Today, we're going to have to import more rice, and importing more rice means more corruption. And this has been pervasive in our country at all times. We cannot have our people sickly. Maternal deaths are high still, comparatively, but nonetheless, what is more important is that we have a responsible populace who will know when to put the brakes on childbirths, and healthy childbirths must be undertaken at all times. We have so many things that we can do in our country. We have a great country, and it is proven by the fact that many of our people can find their future in foreign shores. It is now time to find our future in our own native Filipinas. And we all know what we do not want. What we need is to know what we want. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now we come to the question and answer segment of this forum. The first subject, of course, is poverty, and we will ask you gentlemen to please follow the 2-minute rule. The first question, Charmaine, ladies first. Charmaine Diogracias from NHK.
Good morning, gentlemen. If I may bring down the issue of poverty to a specific item, how do you look at the illegal numbers game vis-a-vis poverty? Do you seriously think that keeping it as social funds of local officials or legalizing it to provide jobs can really mitigate hunger?
Yes, Mr. Perez, you're the first one.
Okay, can you kindly repeat the question?
Yeah. How do you look at the legal numbers game vis-a-vis poverty? And
When you say legal numbers game, you're
wetting?
okay. Just wanted to make sure that's what you meant. Okay, I think gambling, especially the illegal numbers game, is a contributory to poverty because it develops a kind of mental set, a mental mind that poverty can just be eradicated if you win in illegal gambling. So actually, what is really important is to provide people the opportunity to have the proper employment, to have the proper opportunities, to have the real support of government to get rid of that mentality. I think the illegal numbers game is not going to help address poverty, so it should actually be abolished. And I think we should also overall rethink our own national policy on gambling, how this, whether illegal or illegal gambling, how these processes are being used, and most of all, we should not be using gambling money for political purposes. A lot of the PAGCOR money, for example, is being used to actually buy favors from media, as well as also to co-opt the church. This is a well-known fact that has already been revealed, especially during the time of the Garci scandal. And this is also the source of funds. Illegal gambling is a source of funds for political patronage that then allows this unhealthy cycle of traditional politics to prevail. So therefore, we have to break the backbone of illegal gambling, especially wetting, as this has been the source of many, not only poverty, but also of violence, of political control, and the lack of real choices in this country. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Perlas. Now the same question to be answered by Senator Escudero.
Good morning, ma'am. You yourself said it's illegal. We should simply implement the law until and unless it's legalized by Congress. I do not favor its legalization. What government should do would be to provide alternatives to people who rely on this illegal numbers game for their own livelihood. But until and unless it is legalized by Congress, that should not even be an alternative for anyone insofar as being a way by which poverty can be eradicated in a particular area. And speaking of gambling per se, I also disagree that any numbers game or gambling for that matter would be used as a policy tool to improve the quality of life of our people. I'm sure there are better ways of doing it, more innovative, more moral ways of doing it, other than through, as you described it, the illegal numbers game. Insofar as other forms of gambling allowed by law is concerned, as a policy, I do not think and I do not subscribe to the idea that government itself should be engaged in gambling. There is a clear case of conflict of interest, wherein government is the regulator and operator at the same time. If at all, government should get out of any of the legalized forms of gambling and simply regulate it in the interest of protecting our people insofar as these moral hazards are concerned. Thank you, ma'am.
Well, thank you very much. And now, former President Joseph Estrada.
Well, in my experience as a local official for 17 years, well, I was really against these illegal number games, wetting. But after trying to study the plight of our poor people, there was no alternative but to go on these illegal numbers. I would say that we have to feel the plight of these poor people because they cannot enter into any jobs because their jobs were not available. As you know, you have to see to it that these people is, we could say that hungry stomach knows no law. They have no other choice. Now, if you stop this illegal gambling, where will these people go? They might go to drugs or other serious crime. What I say is that I'm not tolerating it, but I am for legalization of this illegal number games. Because if the casino is being legalized, where millions and many families are separated, and of course this lotto, which is a foreign game, and the government is paying over 20% of the, and this horse racing are also gambling, and of course this cockfighting is also gambling. Come this illegal numbers game of betting cannot be legalized.